All right. So how are you feeling about UX design since our last session? It's been a year now.
Yeah. Yes, it's been a year, but still I'm not confident of like I haven't studied much, but yes,
Mhm.
I did study about the sketching part, like
Okay.
the icons and navigation things and the shading, actually the basic concept of the wireframing. So I've
Mhm.
studied for a few days and then I've just got off the books.
Okay. So do you have any questions that you might have developed in your mind as you were kind of looking at other things and thinking through and retrospecting on what we spoke about so far?
Yes, on IX Mind, that mind maps.
Hmm.
Mind maps. Actually, I had tried to create few, but I couldn't succeed. So I'm just thinking, like, well, when we are thinking about the website perspective, do we have to consider that home page, like website is what we are gonna have in home page, and this is what we are gonna have in product list. So this is actually still making me confused because
So, mind maps are a broader technique or a tool for mapping out what ideas reside in your mind or in a group's mind. Sometimes, you come onto a project and you don't know anything about the company or the project. It might be something brand new, or the company sometimes might say, we've been in business for 7 years and we've had this platform or product or whatever, and nobody likes it. Nobody ever liked it. People don't want to pay money for it or something like that. And so you then need to come up with ideas as to what design areas you might need to explore about to see how you can make the product more sticky, as they call it, or get the people to pay for or buy more from it, and so on. So that could be one example where you use a mind map to plot out some ideas. Or another example might be in what we did, which is to map out some of the information architecture, so that okay, a person has a profile, and that profile has a name, surname, picture, etc. Um, so that you can then see the correlations between things. Um, or you can just use it for exploring generally, because like our minds work more like this, they're like sort of a mesh structure, right? And that mesh structure um, is is a bit like when you go on the Wikipedia page and then you start clicking. It's like I go on Wikipedia to read about, let's say, Persian rugs, and then I end up clicking on Persia and then history, and then from history to somewhere like ancient civilizations, and then to like Egypt, then pyramids, then and I go off like way too far. Uh, and so that's the sort of mesh structure of the internet or information architecture. And most people find that very messy, to both navigate and comprehend. And in a mind map, you either have a sort of pyramidal layout, or you have some sort of central focus point where then you can map things out from. So sometimes, for example, I do some songwriting, okay, and I might just write a title. I might use mind maps to write songs with. So I write the title of the song, let's say, All Is Self. That's the title, right? And then the first thing that comes out is like verse 1, and then verse 2, and then verse 3. But I want to then say, well, what happens in the verse 1? So you might go like, where are things happening? Who is there? why are they there? What's going on? You know, and that kind of prompts you to then think, okay, where is this happening? It's happening in London. It's happening in the universe. It's happening in a galaxy far away, right? So what happens in the galaxy far away? It's aliens. It's weirdness. What happens in London? There's the Queen. There is reincarnation of Princess Diana. You know, this like basically this just prompts you to ideate without you kind of sitting there and going, oh God, I need to write a song. I have no idea what I'm doing, right? So these things are actually known as mental scaffolding. Okay, so the scaffolding is on a building. Like while you are building the building, the scaffolding is there to provide you a way to build the building before it's built. Once you build the building, you can remove the scaffolding and you have the final structure. But before that, you can't really build it and climb onto anything without having the scaffolding as an aid, right? So like wireframes, sketches, mind maps, post-it notes with ideas that you can stick around, all these kind of tools are all mental scaffolding that helps you go from, let's say, an idea of let's teach people UX online, you know, which a lot of like business owners might say, I know exactly what I want. And then you ask them a question and they go, well, I haven't really thought about that. And you ask them another question, and well, I haven't really thought about that either. And it's like, well, how can you then describe that as you know that exactly what you want? You know, it's like there is a fidelity of understanding an idea, yeah. And the initial fidelity might be like, let's teach people user experience online. The final fidelity is like high definition, really carefully worded bits of course that work as a timeline, game, collectible, you know, units of understanding with, you know, worksheets to work against, all that kind of stuff, right? Like there is a huge gap between that initial let's teach people online and the final thing of having all the content produced and so on. And in between that, there are all these ways of getting there, right? And as you've seen, you know, we've been like doing quite a bit of sketching, wireframing, prototyping, mind mapping, information architecture. All these things are just kind of to help us get out of our minds what we're thinking, because like you like I don't know what you're thinking, right? And the biggest problem, okay, so sometimes you see like ants, they like in a colony together, and like when you study ants or if you've seen programs about ants, they have some sort of pheromones, right? Chemical messages that they send to each other, and chances are those chemical messages are like either like move out of my way, do you need some food, right? And like I'm working, move out of my way, or something like that, right? And based on that, they just kind of go around and do their thing. But with like humans, it's like I'm not quite hungry, but I feel like having some popcorn, and I could really do with a Red Bull, but I'm not sure. And then I put on Netflix and I don't know what I want to watch. It's all the stuff that I like, but I don't really want to watch it. You know, humans are a lot more complicated, and what's going on in our mind, God only knows, right? And so what we're trying to do in this process of UX design is to really map out what's in our mind and what we really like, because, you know, often the time we will say we really like something, but we are firstly lying to ourselves and then to the rest of the world, because we don't really know ourselves that well. Okay, and this is why I kept on saying to all the students at General Assembly that humans lie, you know, with a swear word before lie. So people effing lie, not because they're evil, but because they don't really know what they want, you know. And this process of sketching things out and wireframing and mind mapping and so on, you start actually going, oh, I've got actually, in the first instance, you might think I don't really have any ideas. So this scaffolding prompts you to come up with new ideas. And then you start realizing, oh, I've got so many ideas, but actually out of these so many ideas, only a few are really good. And the rest are either just replicating what I've seen elsewhere, which we don't want to build like something that like everyone else has done, or it's even worse than that, right? Or it's not relevant, or it's too complicated to implement, or it just doesn't really sound good for the user, and all these kind of things. So there's like millions of reasons why something doesn't work, yeah, and only like a few reasons why something does work, yeah. So finding things that really do work very well is actually really hard, like Edison, who originally made a light bulb, created like 2,000 prototypes of a light bulb before he made one that works, you know. And you know, he famously said, like, I didn't fail in making light bulbs. I succeeded 2,000 times in learning what doesn't work, right? So that's the process of, and you know, and these are people who are experts in electricity, experts in all this kind of stuff, and they need to create 2,000 prototypes before they actually make something that really works.
So have you checked the mind map, the mind map which I have sent you of the job site?
Let me take a look again.
I really want to know if I'm going in the right direction.
So you've created that in which folder was it in?
Extra in the end.
Communicate.
It's in the last.
Oh, yeah, random work. Okay, so yeah, got it. Yeah, I did take a look at this. So what was the idea behind that exercise?
I'm just opening mine. So it was an idea about a job website.
Mm-hmm.
So where a candidate and an employer can find their required fulfill their requirements. So candidate can could be able to upload their resume, apply for a job, search for a job, and find a job. And the employer should be able to hire candidates. They should be able to register, and employer should be able to search the candidate, review their resumes, and approach them for the interview.
Yeah. So I guess this didn't take you that long to map out, right?
Not really.
Yeah. So this is the power of mind maps. That it's a very quick tool to relatively easily and in a structured way map out core concepts and concerns in a system. So you can present this to some sort of technical architect, and they could start asking you all sorts of questions and making all sorts of comments, right, on each one of these things that you listed there. You know, so for example, for candidate profile, you know, there's this kind of edit CV. They could say, well, that's like a big thing around you know, potentially having like a word editor online? Do you mean that by like, you know, just uploading a new CV, or do they write it online? You know, in terms of if they do write it, what sort of formatting options do they need to have? Or if they are uploading a new one, do you keep the old one on the side somewhere as an archive, right? When there's like the manage details piece, what are the details that need to be managed? Is it the stuff from the registration, right? So this basically, again, it's like a scaffolding that it helps me understand what's in your mind and what you considered, right? As opposed to just assuming that either I know, or that we're both thinking the same thing, right? Because most of the time people don't think the same thing, you know. And that's a beautiful thing, because you can get all sorts of different ideas out of people, different people. But then in the end, you're making one system, and that one system needs to be a collection of the best ideas from everyone. And so in terms of this, we sort of looked at mind mapping as part of the information architecture, because most of the time information architects will use mind maps as like structural tools to map out these things. Because from, let's say, from mind maps, you can export like XML outputs of those, right? So those mind maps can become the actual literal scaffolding of a bigger website, let's say. So imagine if you've got major like news website, so it could be covering things like business news, technology news, health news, world news, local news. And then local is like, what is it, like local per country, per region of a country, per city, per area of the city, all that kind of stuff. That all becomes like a massive tree of information. And then they say like, oh, we're just going to start building this news website based on news from Kent. And then we're going to introduce news from Surrey. And then we're going to introduce news from Greater London. And then news from England, and then from UK, and then from Europe, and then from, you know, Europe and Asia, and so on. And so, you know, with the mind map done up front for that content, you can have a very early on view as to how this content is likely to grow and what's the most logical way for it to grow. Because otherwise people just go, let's just add this bit, and then let's add this bit, let's add this bit, and then the end user ends up seeing something that's just completely like a mishmash of all sorts of things, and it's like there's no sense to this. Yeah.
Got it.
Any other questions? So you just got to like think of this in a sense that, like, let's say if like you can imagine some sort of scenario where you're going to work on some classified secret project at Google, let's say, you know, and you turn up there and they're like, Shefali, we want you to work on this project. Can you do it? What's the answer?
Yes, I can give it a try.
Yeah, you can give it a try, but what do you need first?
I need to do research about it first.
But before you even do research, you don't even know what the project is about. So they're going to have to present it to you in some way, shape, or form. Now, if they present you a mind map of things that they want to cover, you'll be very quick, and it's going to be very easy for you to look at that and go, oh, okay, so you're going to have this, and you're going to cater to this, and then have these kind of functions, and so on. So, you know, that's like a really easy to digest compared to like a long document, you know, that kind of talks about all sorts of things, but then you're like, oh, it's slow, it's boring, it's not so visual, it's not really the way the mind works. Human mind was never really designed to consume lots and lots of words, right? Human mind is more like it's a neural network, right? So it's like there's little dots that each do a thing, and then those dots connected together create this sort of mesh network. And that's much more akin to a mind map than a long document or a book, right? This is why people retain from books. When they read books, they only retain 2 to 3% because they haven't really been able to visualize, you know, what the book was talking about, because people are very bad at translating words into pictures, okay? And this is why they would say that civilizations like Egyptians with the hieroglyphs that are much more pictorial letters, in which, let's say, like a bird or an owl can mean like 7 different things depending on where it is in a sentence. You know, that's a much more sophisticated way to communicate concepts and ideas than with words and letters that are like A, B, C, D, right? Why is this relevant to UX design? Because every time you write something out in a document, it's like the worst way to communicate a concept, yeah? Because the human person has to read the words first, then interpret that, then create some sort of a mental picture in their mind, and then start testing that picture in their mind. Most people, like 95% of the people on this planet, either cannot do that at all, or they struggle very heavily. And most importantly, when people read something, they're all going to interpret that document in a very different way and create different pictures. This is why we create mind maps and sketches and wireframes and prototypes and all those kind of things, because we're looking to reduce the ambiguity, the scope for misinterpretation or misunderstanding, right? And this is why we say, like, picture says 1,000 words, very important, but prototype says 1,000 pictures. Okay, so this is why also why video has become very, very popular way for people to communicate online, because this is pictures and words and sounds and shared screens and all this kind of stuff, right? And it's much more easier to communicate on video than it is on voice or texts and so on. And also why it's easier to learn from a video, watching a video lesson, than from reading a book or listening to somebody, etc. And this is why I would not recommend people be reading books, because they said, like, oh, I'm reading this book. First of all, it's going to take you 3 months to read it, because you're not going to read it in a week. Okay, it's a slow process. The retention rate is 2 to 3%. So you'll say, oh yeah, I read a book on UX design. Now you're thinking in your head that you should know this, makes you feel stupid because you've only retained 2 to 3%, right? So you're like, oh, I read the book, but I don't feel any smarter, right? That's like, yeah, because you've at the best taken 2 to 3%. It's taken you a long time to take that 2 to 3% on. And then you're like, well, I read the book, but I don't know it. I don't think I can learn this. I don't think I'm good enough. And all these kind of things start cropping up. And it's a very bad way to learn reading books. Unpopular opinion, but true. Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions that come up to you? I think this is the most important thing, right? For you to take away. That's why I'm kind of laboring the point a little bit here, because, like, the faster and quicker you can get into visual representation of something, right, the better it is. And that's really, in many respects, user experience design, and much of it is a storytelling exercise. Okay, so what are stories made up of? Stories are made up of people, actions, and objects. So it's like Jesus takes Holy Grail. Okay, that is like the Jesus brings Holy Grail. That's like the essence of the Bible. Okay, and then everything around that is like the narrative, right? Or Jesus dies on cross. Okay, that's like, person, action, object. Okay, that's what's known as triple. Okay, you can design the entire universe out of those three types of words. Okay, um, and that is a story. Okay, even that simple sentence is a mini story. Jesus dies on cross. Okay, like, and then it becomes a little bit more abstract. Sadhguru speaks truth. Okay, well, what's truth? Is that an object? Is that what is that? What does that look like? How do you illustrate truth? Yeah, you can draw a cross, but truth is trickier to draw, right? So if you're working in a banking project, they might start talking about, we've got equity-backed collateralized debt products. How do you draw that? Yeah. Whereas on an e-commerce website, you have the idea of a basket. People buy a basket of products. Oh, okay. Yeah. So some things are a lot more abstract than others, right? And so people end up having different philosophies of view on all of that, right? So that's really the nature of the world we live in and the universe, right? And many words have different meanings. Even just one word can have many different meanings. And so as a designer, what you're looking to do is disambiguate. Okay, disambiguate what is it that you're really trying to say, and what is it really trying to do, and who is supposed to use it how. Yeah, that's why it's important to have that user in mind, Punja, that we were sort of writing about, and so on, because that's the main character in our story. And what does she do? She signs up to the site. She watches a lesson. She posts a question. She reads an answer. She gets badges for completing lessons, and so on, right? So this is something that is so essential. If this is like one thing that you can take away from all our conversations, right? Just remember that triple, okay, which is a person, subject,
Action.
verb, action, does something, on an object, which is usually a thing. If you can write your sentences in that way, you are onto a like massive winner, right? So that with those 3-word sentences, you can describe the universe. And in the past, what I've done is I've run like entire design thinking workshops, for example, with marketing departments, because they would do like, or salespeople, they would start talking about like, with our IT infrastructural platform with the API backbone, you can integrate and associate different types of feeds into a thing. And I'm like, stop. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Just describe all of that in 3 words. First is the person, second is the action, and third is object. And it's like secretaries send emails. And it's like, okay, great. What else does it do? And it's like managers monitor staff. Okay, get it? It's like, forget all this API and platform and cross integration, because that's just the means to an end, right? And that's really what's led to high complication of IT systems, right? And for there having to be hundreds and hundreds of people who are designing, creating, architecting all this stuff. Well, it's like, because no one's really taken it back to the basics, right? And those basics are super powerful because they get at the truth, at the core, at the essence of what this is about. And it's a very powerful way to communicate and then illustrate from that, and then cross connect those little kind of mini stories, right? Illustrate them, show them, get people to connect with them, and really get the essence of design in there. Like, we were talking about what's at the heart, what's at the focus point of the thing. It's like, so each one of those things, if it's like secretaries send emails, it's like, what's at the heart of that? Is it the sort of the send button, or is it, what's at the heart of that? Is it just a sort of like a voice controlled thing where they press a button and they go like, hello Shefali, how are you doing? Let me know when you can do next session. And that's the way you send emails, right? And then that gets typed out and sent to the right person. I don't know, but it's a very, very powerful model for architecting things. And the idea of architecting is building it brick by brick, right? Laying the foundations, laying the walls, the boundaries of the thing, making the shape, designing the interior and the exterior look and feel of things. Something like Taj Mahal being a most famous example of architectural wonder of the world, which is completely symmetrical apart from one thing. That's the only one thing that's asymmetrical. You know which one it is?
Yeah.
So yeah, there we are. And by the way, the UX design, this is completely related, because UX, the first people that started doing things like wireframes are architects. Architects produce architectural wireframes. So when they draw those little outlines of houses and so on, those are wireframes. Okay, and those wireframes are like technical blueprints for like where each room is, how big is each window, where the door goes, and so on. And like the builders, right, they will never, any decent builder will never ever build a building without that sketch, because they don't know what they're doing. And then the end user, whoever is like ordered the work, they're like, well, I have no idea what you want. Yeah, without seeing an architectural plan and drawing, I don't know what I'm building. And then you will always go say to me, oh, I didn't want that. I wanted that to be there. I wanted that to be this. Like, because people don't know, right? This is why architects exist. And so imagine, like, we're potentially heading towards a situation where majority of these systems that we build are going to have millions and millions of users, potentially billion and more. So the things that you're architecting as a UX designer are potentially going to be used by hundreds of millions of people. Yeah. Now, if those hundreds of millions of people are having to click 3 buttons instead of one button, yeah? And that's causing them to spend 5 seconds extra on an interaction. That's 100 million people times 5 seconds. That's 500 million seconds per interaction, okay? And that's the sort of the difference. Now, if an interaction has to be done 3,000 times a day, yeah, that becomes 5 seconds times 3,000 times per day times 100 million people. And that's the cost of interaction design, yeah? And so this is actually really how they evaluate the value add of great design. And great design is about being able to remove all the things that don't matter, yeah? The best design is one where you remove everything that's no longer needed, not when you're adding more and more, yeah? Because the tools that we design are there as means to an end, right? The tools enable you to do a job. Let's say, you know, Netflix enables you to watch a movie quickly. You don't want to be sitting in front of Netflix bored and be kind of like, I don't know what to watch. Should I click this? Should I click that? No, you want to watch the movie. That's the idea. And so that's what you use Netflix for, not for navigating through movies. That's just a means to an end. So very, very important thing to generally grasp and remember. And if you are ever kind of lost or confused, that's a thing to go back to, right? It's like what, you know, Sadhguru would talk about, like, you know, if you get lost in your mind or you're not sure, you're feeling bad, you just go back to breath, right? And like, and then you should be back more kind of grounded. The grounding in UX design is like, who is doing what to what, okay? And when you go back to that simple triple, then you can go, okay, everything else is like an embellishment or some sort of necessary evil that has to be added for either some sort of business reason or whatever. It's like an example being typical on the websites is you click to view a video, and before that, you have to first view an ad, right? So it's like 6 seconds of pain, right? Going like, I don't care about cryptocurrency trading app where it's all on one place for cryptocurrency trading, and all I'm watching is Sadhguru video, right? And but I have to I have to waste 7 seconds of my life watching some nonsense cryptocurrency app trading before I can actually hear the guy speak about truth, right? So that's the price you pay for using free services, advertising, right? And that's why everyone hates adverts so much, because yeah, they're not supposed to be there, especially UX designers. When some business says, oh, we are ad supported business, right? UX designers is like, I hate this. However, you know, something like Facebook has made, you know, billions and is making billions on that kind of business model. But the reason why they're making billions on that business model is because there's so many UX designers actually designing the ad experience, right? To then say, you know, for example, when it's the right time for the UX coach promotion on Facebook, we could actually use that Poonja persona and then say, well, Poonja is typically, let's say, between 23 and 40, okay, in age, okay, and we're interested in Poonjas that live in London and New York and Paris, let's say big cities, right? And we're interested in Poonjas that are in full-time employment, okay, maybe junior or something like that. And we're also interested in something else, right? And then Facebook ads will actually only show to those kind of people. Now, if we've done good enough research, right, on who our target audience is, each one of those ads that shows up on Facebook will be much more relevant than just random ad that shows on God knows what channel. Okay, so potentially from 100 ad views, there could be, 100 people signing up to a course, that costs, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 pounds. And then, that makes sense.
Just
And
for one code, and every time you get into any website or Facebook, you will see hundred of ads from other.
yeah, so what Facebook does is that it listens to your conversations, right? So if you're having a like conversation on a messenger or whatever, it'll then prompt ads from that and so on. Yeah. And
Details and what have you searched for? Okay, they just save it and then they start showing you ads related to that.
exactly. And so so that ends up, that whole UX design ends up being creepy in some senses, because I notice also that, for example, Google does a lot of this thing. Like, for example, we're chatting here on this Hangouts, right? And so then Google is one way or another listening to this conversation. And then when I'm watching YouTube videos, it's picking the conversation that from the conversation that we've had, is picking recommended videos based on what we've talked about, right? So I remember, like, last time I spoke to a friend about this book called Effortless Mastery, right? And it was on Facebook Live video, and then on Facebook it was actually on the video. It wasn't even typed out, but it was on the video live stream. And then I go through my feed, and there was like, buy Effortless Mastery on Amazon, right? I was like, whoa, that's really creepy, right? Because I didn't really consciously opt into those kind of recommendations. And because I didn't consciously opt into that, then that sort of listening in becomes a lot more like, it just feels a lot more intrusive, yeah, than I would like it to be. Yeah. So that's the other side of hyper personalization. Yeah, this is like in management sciences, they're like, management is all about teaching people to create products that are personalized to you, right? So it's like, a perfect company will never sell the same product again. It will be like something that's always tailored and personalized to you. And this is why, if you're buying a car, right, you're buying a car, and then you'll go into a shop, and they'll say, well, you can choose which color seats you want inside, which leather, or do you want leather, or do you want this, or do you want spoilers on the side, or do you want extra sort of buttons that open windows or set the temperature, all that kind of stuff, right? And you sort of, through that personalization and customization, you end up having a sense of ownership, right, over that product, and it being a lot more reflective of who you really are, as opposed to everyone having, like, like iPads are always in sort of same color, more or less, right? And so now when there's like a red iPhone, people are like, oh my god, they have it in red, like it's a big deal, right? And the problem is that the price is so high, nobody's willing to upgrade.
On color basis also. Somebody wants pink color, so you have to pay. I think it's one extra $100. It doesn't matter if you want pink or pink.
Yeah. And so so this is where actually in the UX checklist that we were using, one of the things that is in there as a heart, and this is really what we've ended up discussing really in this session, is this idea of ethical design, right? So that thing where like YouTube and Google listen into the live streams that I'm conversing about with other people, whether it's private or public, right? And then recommends me YouTube videos off the back of that. It's a question of whether that is ethical thing to do, right? And why is it ethical thing to do? And it all links back then to actually, Sadhguru and all these kind of wisdom teachers, right? Because the wisdom teachers are telling us about how we should live our lives in a more inclusive, ethical, and fair way. Yeah. And as designers, especially as UX designers, now you got to bear in mind what I was saying about, this system that you're designing or any system that you're building might be impacting 100 million plus people. The decisions that you make as a designer are based on some sort of moral and ethical foundation, right? So some people be like, let's just get them, let's just trick them to share all their emails with us, and then we will sell those emails, for money, and then we can be rich. And if they die from that, we don't care because we're rich, right? That's like a way you could think about something. But that's not moral and that's not ethical. And actually, long term, if you're killing your customers, you won't have repeat customers and you will actually kill your business too. So actually building your customer and growing your customer and helping your customer grow and be more prosperous is good for your business in the long term, because that customer, especially if they like you and respect you and appreciate you and see you as ethical and moral person that you are, they'll keep coming back to you and buy more from you and interact with you more and recommend you more, right? So there is actually very, very deep and profound and actually commercial reason for why Sadhguru is like an important teacher for UX designers, because we are interacting with technology more nowadays than we interact with humans, and that technology needs to be ethically, sustainably, and inclusively designed first, so that it can be built that way too. And what are the ways in which we can, as designers, we can discriminate through design? We can discriminate through all the ways that, like, humans have been discriminated against and not included for over the millennia, right? Which is race, sex, gender, class, caste, age, IQ, ability, disability, origin, language spoken, skills, mathematical skills, academic qualifications, all these kind of things, right? So design, a great design, should be sustainable, ethical, and inclusive. And that's why that's been added to the UX checklist. The funny thing being that the guy who produced this had only added this, like, not even a year ago, right? The UX checklist has been around for many, many years, but the sustainable, ethical, inclusive has only come in like less than a year ago. So it was kind of assumed thing in the past, but no longer can we assume that, because you see that, like, a lot of business owners, especially in the capitalist society, they'll just be like, well, let's just make money. Who cares about people, right? And who cares about whether this is ethical, or who cares about the planet, right? Like, we make money if we pollute the planet and kill fish in the sea, you know, who cares? We're rich, right? That's how actually a lot of quote unquote successful business people think. And that's not good design. And this is why companies like Apple are driving a lot, and Tesla are driving a lot more towards cyclical economies, right? Where, like, if you use a, you know, if you use an iPad and it becomes old or whatever, or you've broken it or whatever, you can trade it in, because they can reuse the materials back and make another iPad from it, or repair it and so on, because otherwise it's just a waste. It goes into a dump and it destroys the planet, which is not ethical. It's not sustainable. So a lot more companies are driving towards sustainable design. Now, the other thing that's, in terms of just purely software companies, is that, like, people are spending so much time on things like Facebook, YouTube, etc., Instagram, Snapchat, that these things have become unethical, or were unethical from start. They're very addictive, and just very, very addictive psychologically. And so chances are maybe this year or next year we're going to start seeing a lot more messaging from those kind of social media tools and software tools, to basically start telling us, hey, you've actually been on here for a couple of hours. Maybe you should, you know, go and walk in the park, right? Speak to your husband, speak to your wife, right? Don't just watch Facebook videos, right? And that's actually better for Facebook, for people to use it less, but create better stories in real world that they can then share on Facebook. That's better for Facebook than just people kind of passively sitting there and sharing stupid cat and dog pictures, you know, all day long. So it's a sort of somewhat unintuitive and unpredicted thing for us to do, because the KPIs, the key performance indicators, were always around how often does the user use it, how much did they share, how much did they click around, how much did they buy, all that kind of stuff. But now it's a lot more about, are we being good to the human being, because we want them to be healthy and prosperous, so that inevitably they can spend more money, but in a sustainable way. So really, every single thing that Sadhguru talks about is 100% design related. Is 100% design related, and I just, you know, I would just love to see a lot more designers be learning from gurus, you know, like that, than learning from some sort of techno prophets, right? Who are like, put more chip in your thing, or, you know, data, big data, blah. You know, it's more like, what is the human experience that we are creating, right? And it's nothing to do with technology so much. It's to do with our mind's perception and acceptance of our experience of life, right? And this is really the heart and the soul of UX design. The ultimately the transformation of humans through technology, right? So if I'm using an iPad, right, I could be using this iPad for just playing a dumb Candy Crush game. Okay, I'm not going to learn anything from it. It doesn't do me any good. It's a waste of my time. It's waste of battery life. It's waste of resource, right? Or I could be using it to draw pictures to my daughter, stories to my daughter, which I just did. Like, I'll show you an example here. So this is a story of a bunch of bananas. One of the bananas breaking away from the pack, and then deciding to fly to the sky, and it meets the moon, and then the moon realizes it's like a banana, and banana realizes it's like a moon. And then my daughter said, but that moon looks a lot more like a Pac-Man. But either way, that's much more transformative and better way to use an iPad than playing Candy Crush on it, right? And this is really what the ethics of design and sustainability and inclusivity is about, and helping people actually develop that imagination and thinking and ability. Okay, questions? You're on mute.
Being a UX designer, when we start making a project, when we start working on a project, so ethics are everywhere, right? In every step of our thinking. So we have to think ethical. So, like you said, if we are taking an email ID of the customers, we should not sell it. That's an ethical part. So where does the ethics come when we design UX?
Ethics comes in really at every step of the way, right? Because like it's a sort of rainbow of ethical decisions. So for example, there is something, and you should make a note of this, which is in UX design, there's something called dark patterns. Okay, dark patterns is where you basically trick people into doing things that they either misunderstood, right? And you know, psychologically, from psychological, training and observation, you know they will misunderstand it, right? But you do it anyway. A classic one is when you're booking a flight on Ryanair, and they say to you, do you want insurance with your baggage, right? And you never want the insurance with the baggage, but it's kind of pre-ticked. It's like extra £11 for the baggage. So for you to untick it, you have to go through this list of countries, right? Or for which country you want the insurance for, and they're in alphabetic order. But to untick that, you have to go through the drop down, and it says, no, I don't want insurance, and it's under N, right? And no one can ever really know that that's there. So you have to go through this list and waste your time to find that, no, I don't want insurance. So it can go from £11 to 0. Yeah. And that's a classic dark pattern. And most people go like, oh, I can't be bothered with this. Let's just pay for the insurance and who cares, right? So that's a kind of classic dark pattern. Another thing where it's unethical is where Ryanair, we're talking about introducing £1 per toilet trip on flights, right? That's quite unethical, you know.
It's been long. I have taken flight from them.
Yeah, so that was a kind of a classic sort of unethical thing, but there's other things like you like, for example, if like I worked on this HSBC stuff, right, with like global bank transformation. So you can, like, people are buying potentially mortgages online. Mortgage is like a 25-year financial product, and you don't necessarily know at all how much it's going to cost, right? So you can do all this kind of stuff, like say only 1,000 a month, right? But then there's like a tiny little small print that says, and if you don't pay for once, then it's going to go up by 20% and all that kind of stuff. Like, credit card companies are very like notorious for this, right? That's really unethical, yeah? But they do it anyway, right? And people know that, and that's why people hate credit card companies, right? So all those kind of things are unethical, and sometimes as a designer you will actually get pushed into doing things that you don't agree with. And that's not even like, you can go into, okay, I'll give you an example elsewhere. I worked for a company called Unibet. Okay, now Unibet is a betting company. Now I was like, well, I don't mind working for a betting company because people are not forced to bet, right? You choose to bet. So if you want to bet, you bet, okay? And so, if people are betting on tennis and football and so on, it's like kind of a little bit fun. Okay, you'll probably lose money, but you should know what you're doing, right? So I never bet because I don't know who to bet on, right? So because I know I'm going to lose money. Same, I don't play lottery. But within that, like, I was working on this portal where there was it was about like sports scores, right? So it's like it was a site called Goalwire, and so it would show scores of different sports, who won which table tennis match, football match, basketball match. And it was like, I was really fascinated by that whole data set. So I was like really excited. I love sports. So I wanted to design a portal that has all these sports scores, and very interesting. And then say, oh, like in the future, we want to introduce people being able to bet on each game. It's like, okay, fine. And then they said, when I finished that design, they said, we want you to come on and work on this other project. Okay, I was like, oh, cool, another project, great, okay. And so these two directors pulled me into the room, and they said, we've got this thing where we got people playing like slot machines, yeah, online, which is just like a random thing. And I said, As soon as I heard slot machines, I was like, I'm not really into this, because this is just like pure gambling. There's like no control over that. And then they said, well, we've got about 2,000 people who spend £1,000 a month playing slot machines. And I was like, that's like 2 million a month on slot machines. Whoever's like an idiot wasting their money on this, like, you've hit the jackpot. And they said, like, so okay, what's the problem, right? And they go, we want you to get them to spend £2,000 a month playing slot machines. Yeah. And I was like, first of all,
UX designer to design the pattern in such a way that they will
yeah, exactly. And it's through like manipulative psychological devices, like, you want extra credits, right? Or you get an extra 3 spins or stuff like that. I was like, I couldn't get my head around, why would anybody spend £1,000 a month playing stupid slot machines and knowing that they're going to lose the money and losing it and playing again next month. But now these guys weren't happy with that. They wanted me to make another, double up on that. And I just said, like, after that meeting, I walked out, went to the line manager and said, look, I just want to give my notice here. I don't want to work on that project. So to me, that was completely unethical, and I just couldn't work on that. So, and similarly, like, I always said, if a recruitment agent calls me up and it's like, is there any companies that you don't want to work for? I'm like, anything to do with war, I'm not interested. Right? If it's killing people, I'm not interested, even like indirectly. So that's because like UX designers can come up with better bombs, certainly, smarter bombs that kill people better and faster and so on. But I'm not interested in killing people, so goodbye. Like, I don't care if it's millions of pounds. Right?
You say to them that you don't want to work with someone who is developing something related to war?
Yeah. So, but most of the time, you don't really like. You don't. I mean, there's other, companies that you might not want to work for. So like cigarette companies, tobacco, right? Oil, yeah. Pharmaceutical, it's like a lot of these kind of companies that are selling, like, let's say, like antidepressant tablets. It's like, again, Sadhguru talk about, like, America is hooked on pills, you know, like 60% of Americans are hooked on pills, and the rest of the world is working hard and catching up, right? And it's like, do you really want to work in a pharmaceutical company that's helping people kind of take pills for antidepressant, where it's actually meditation is better cure for depression than taking some stupid pills? Um, you know, it's not like, it's not my top choice, you know. And a lot of this kind of financial world is also a bit iffy, you know. It's like, you know, do you want to be working at some, you know, like some of these banks, you know, in America that were lending out to people that couldn't afford mortgages, and it's like, it doesn't matter, they were like, had salespeople, it's just like, just you're fine, just get on this, you know. So there's a lot of that unethicalness, unfortunately. And you know, this is why it's important to actually discuss this a little bit and bear it in mind, and why it's you know, for my company Integral, the whole mission statement is redesigning humanity, and that whole like ethicalness and sustainability and inclusivity is at the heart of this. Because you know, I don't want to see war, I don't want to see depression, I don't want to see people being conned for their money on slot machines. You know, I want to see more of what Sadhguru is proposing, right? And less of what we currently have, which is Trump, wars, oppression, discrimination, and all those kind of things, right?
Would you mind hiring me for your as an employee of your company?
Well, I mean, this is the whole process here, you know. So I actually see this whole thing as, you know, that's really why I'm interested in building, you know, people up, not just in UX design, but it also, we have this other program called Fresh Mind. I'm not sure if you've seen that and so on, but like, you know, that's about like complete mindset redesign. Because a lot of people be like, you know, they're working in pharmaceutical or banking or government sectors and so on, and they just think they're like doing quite noble work, right? But like noble work is happening in places like Isha Foundation, right? And then, you know, but you would say to somebody like working in the city, you know, Isha Foundation, and they go, oh, just stupid Indian villagers, forget that, primitive, you know. It's like, no, you don't understand. Like, there's thinking at a higher level than you are. You know, you're primitive, spending £50,000 on a bottle of champagne, you know.
Uh, these things can't be understood by every person, because you need a really high mindset to understand and
Yeah,
take something from people like Sadhguru.
yeah, exactly.
This is not everybody's cup of tea. And if you if you go and start explaining to them, okay, start do meditation, do this,
Mm.
you should do uh, that way. Get up in the morning, sit for 10 minutes, breathe in and do breathe in and breathe out, meditate for some time. Go crazily, go from here. I don't want to hear from you again. So this is
Yeah, and
actually the mindset of people is you
yeah,
can't.
exactly. But the thing is that the thing is that the current, most of current businesses that are quote unquote successful, and that's why Sadhguru talks about success is the other side of the coin of failure. Failure and success are just two sides of the same coin. So most of the people who are successful in this country are successful in an unsustainable way. Yeah. And so it's only really a matter of time before that success becomes a failure. And then when people become a failure, they're like, I don't want this anymore. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have wanted that success in the first place. So the actual alternative to success or failure is sustainability. Yeah. And then when people clock onto that, then they're like, oh, I should be just working on making myself fully sustainable, and then everything else around me fully sustainable too. Yeah. And then it becomes a completely different ball game. because for you to become a lot more sustainable, you need to have an environment and network and community that's also sustainable, because you don't want to live on your own, and so on and so forth. So all these things kind of go from self, as I say, from self to self, you know, from lower self to higher self, and so on and back, really. You know, and that creates that cyclical economy. So this is an important kind of point in our conversation, in our process of learning UX design, because hopefully you would have got from, you know, being completely unclear as to what UX design is, to actually now understanding that it's basically a structured process of designing for human experience to help them transform into the next self. Because, you know, with me, with an iPad that I can instantly share pictures with you via this internet connection, is much more powerful me than without the iPad and without the internet, you know, and so on. So these things are empowering to a great extent, but we got to learn use them for the good, right? And learn to use them for the good. And if we can't think of a good way to use it, then just put it away, you know, and meditate and just be with our families or whatever, right? It's really important. And that's all part of our experience. Yeah.
So I think we have we missed the I don't think I'm sure we have missed two parts of communication, like language and accessibility.
Yeah. So I wonder if you know, going forward we need to think through like what are, because we did, you know, we purposely and consciously skipped a couple of steps in previous things because it wasn't necessarily so either so relevant, or it's easier to get back to that later on. So for example, with prototyping, you need a lot more wireframes and sketches to be able to prototype something. Similarly with accessibility, it's really kind of, accessibility is about making things accessible to anybody, and easy to get to. It's kind of a
Like when we have when for example we are filling out a form, and click 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 click. So it should not be like many, so a huge set of text for the user to read, and then click 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 click. So it should be easily, the end part should be easily accessible. It should be less steps. Is that
that's usability. Accessibility means that, for example, somebody might not have access to the internet. So how else would they be able to access that? Or if they don't, if people can't, some people are blind or don't really see. So the interfaces need to be built in a way that is supporting like screen readers and things like that. There's also other things around color recognition. A lot of people are actually colorblind, so if you're just relying on colors to communicate differences between things, a lot of people won't see green from red from orange, you know. So you need to use things other than just color to communicate differences of things on screen, and it's things like that. And language is a lot to do with words basically, but also actually the whole language piece is a big one, insofar that, you know, what I was talking about, you know, the person, action, object, and sort of being able to write things in very succinct ways that are very clear and communicate really what you.
I was reading about languages like translation into different languages, wherever you are writing.
Well, there is an element of like some interfaces need to work in international, ways. So, you know, some, like for example, hotel websites, you know, they'll be like available to people in Arabic, in Hindu, in English, in
How do we do that? Like, is there any software which translates the language, or it's just
well, at one point in the past, there was a thing about internationalization of interfaces, right? So, like, each page would need to be translated into multiple languages, but now it's all kind of built into the browser. So the browser automatically translates that. So it's become less and less of a thing. But there's more around language, around a sort of how to write for ease of use and consumption, right? So, for example, on like buttons, calls to action, things like buy now is much clearer than something else, right? And so when you start writing sort of so for example, I have button in front of me here that says stop broadcast, right? So that's language. Yeah. All the things that are written on the screen is language. Okay. And each word needs to be really considered as to why it's there. And to a great extent, we've covered quite a bit of that language through the wireframes. Sorry, not wireframes, the mind maps, right? So that's why I was saying to you, think about, if you call a person in the mind map, you should then be calling them that on the screens as well, right? And use consistent wording across all your interfaces, because otherwise it will be inconsistent and less usable and more unclear and so on. Yeah.
one last question? Did we get a chance to review the wireframe? Because I want to proceed in taking the detailed pages. So if you let me know how are their app improved, I'll work on that tomorrow.
So the ones that you did on the UX Coach wireframes on the studio thing, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I took a look, and it's excellent. First pass. One of the things to um, look for and aim for doing as much as possible is to. Oh, why is it asking me to sign in? So one of the things to look for is to use as simple objects as possible. So for example, when you're adding sort of colors to buttons and things like that, you've got a little sort of gradient and so on. I wouldn't worry about all that, and the sort of drop shadows and stuff like that. I wouldn't worry about that. I would just kind of like think in terms of when it's wireframes, just think about the structure, black and white, words that you use. So for example, you've got like stories/reviews, that's quite, it's kind of like undecided thing. Is it stories? Is it reviews? Is it two things there? It's like, so that's kind of where language comes into play. Like our courses as opposed to just courses. So things like that like make a difference, right? And a little bit also of layout. So like where you've got search for courses, and like that search for courses is not quite in the center of that search field, it looks a little bit uglier, than it can do. So things like that. There is an element of sort of, wireframes aren't about sort of making them visually beautiful, but there is something to be said about consistency, of going back to that Taj Mahal. It's like people love to see things that are in a symmetrical way. So but yeah, it's a good first pass. I'd say just don't be afraid to explore more in terms of just also wireframing, right? And going back to sketching and wireframing and doing lots more of that, to both sort of master the tool set, but also to explore ideas, right? And think about in terms of what can you remove to create better experience, right? Like removing things is better than adding things. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have a look on this tomorrow,
Yeah.
and we have to we have to draw wireframe for admin part also, right? Administrator.
I'd say, always start with what the end user is going to see. That's the most important thing. So we should wireframe the whole lot that the end user is likely to see. And that's why it's important to keep the scope narrow, right? Because you need to build this as well, right? And then more wireframes there is, more build there is, and then more time. And then there's, it's just like, so hopefully, this can be done in 3-4 pages, right? And at least we can create some sort of minimum viable product and then build out from that. And this is also why it's important to have that mapping of the mind mapping, right, of where we want to take this forward. So in the minimum viable product, we'll build the bare minimum, and then going forward, they'll say, oh, now we add this page for questions and answers, and now we add this page for, I don't know, additional tools, and so on and so forth, right?
So it's like one flow from start to end has already ready, I think, from my side. That's what I wanted to you to check. The home page is there, lesson page is there, course information page is there, and sign up and login page is there, and payment details and payment done.
Mm-hmm.
So what else we can do now?
So the question is, on your, for example, on your home or your, what you call the home page,
Yeah.
right? There's all this kind of stories, reviews, blogs, mentors, meetups, right?
Yeah.
What about that?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that's, I get it, what that's supposed to be, but that's also quite like, each one of those things can be like a mini website on its own, right?
Okay.
So the easiest thing is to somewhat remove that, but then it's a question of, does that actually make sense? And if we remove it as separate pages, where can we put it in as like little sort of, sprinkles, like, section of a homepage or something like that. So if you look at some of my ideas, that's why I did it kind of as one long homepage as opposed to separate pages. Reason being because it's quicker and easier to build, and it's still given some of the information. So feel free to steal and borrow from mine, and maybe take some of my sketches and try and sort of do them in a wireframe format, and through that you can
I have stolen it from yours only. I
okay.
so
um
yeah, I have stolen it from yours only.
You gotta learn how to steal better, you gotta learn to steal better.
Sorry.
Gotta become a better thief.
I'm a very bad thief. I can't handle that.
Yeah. There's actually a book called Steal Like an Artist. Okay. So this is actually very highly recommended. It's like, bad artist borrow, best artist steal, so yeah, just if something's good, just shamelessly, steal it. So
That's why
okay.
I really want your review on everything so that I can think more on it, and I'll
Yeah,
try.
sure. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at that tomorrow as a more thorough thing, and feedback to you in a more sort of complete sense. Yeah.
And in the meantime, I'll see if we can remove the blog and to reduce
Yeah.
part for.
Basically, the point here is less is more. Less is more. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, Wednesday. Okay. One more thing. Actually,
Uh-huh.
Nitin, this month, Nitin is going out of London for
Uh-huh. Did you
uh,
say 3 weeks?
3 days a week. This month,
3 days.
January.
Okay. Uh-huh. Okay.
Now, is it possible that on Wednesday, if we can take class in the evening, in the afternoon?
Uh, yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
like my son haven't hadn't he was awake
Yeah.
till 9:30. So
Yeah.
if he's not here, it will be really tough for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can. Yeah.
So maybe
Which time of the day works for you?
uh, I think we can do it in the morning at 11 or in the afternoon. It's just for this month.
Yeah. So sometime in the afternoon, probably about like I don't know 1 or 2 o'clock would be best for me. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. All right. Nice one. Thank you so much, Fali.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.